Pass Budget Committee meeting for May 3rd, 2022. First item of agenda is we'll do just a roll call. If you could just we'll start with Councilor DeLagrange. Would you please start and go down and name and whether you're council or a budget committee member, which is both, but.
Sure. Councilor DeLagrange present.
And lay member Jason Javeron.
Lay member Gordon Langenbeck.
Kirk Collins, City Council.
Lay member Josh Ballack.
Joel King, City Council.
Tom Brandis, lay member.
Linda Barkey, lay member.
Tom Bradbeer, lay member.
Aaron Kubik, budget officer.
J.C. Rowley.
Vanessa Auger, City Council.
Rick Riker, City Council.
Valerie Lovelace, City Council.
Rob Pell, City Council. And Finance Director, your name again is?
That's J.C. Rowley.
Thank you.
And then we have two people online, I believe. Councilor Auger did mention she was here, and we've got one more online, correct? Tripp?
Yep, Tripp Androy, lay member.
Excellent, thank you too. We also have Adam Schultz, who is also online and attending the Budget Committee meetings with us during this fiscal year 23 session.
Yes. I was going to point.
Where's, Tammy, come on up here. And Tammy is also present. Thank you again for everyone here. If we take a look at the agenda, reviewing the agenda today, we have a budget officer convene the committee meeting. Then we have adopt committee ground rules, a delivery of budget message and receive budget documents, overview of strategic plan and related capital projects for lands and building, ratification of the budget hearing schedule, receive public comment, discuss any general questions or information requests, and then continue hearing to Tuesday, May 10th. So with that, as budget officer, I will take on agenda number 1, and after there is a budget chair, I'll turn it over to the budget chair for the meeting. So opening up for nominations for budget chair. Nominations for chair.
Nominate Tom Brandis. Second.
Okay, I have a first and a second. Do I have any other nominations? Hearing none, all in favor of Tom Brandis as budget chair? That is unanimous. So Tom, I think you and Mr. Bradbeer will need to switch places, and then we'll get started. And I turn it over to you, Chair.
So now we're looking to nominate a vice chair. Can we have any nominations for that? Valerie?
I nominate Tom Bradbeer, Vice Chair.
Second. Okay. Tom Bradbeer has been nominated. Any other nominations? Okay. Those in favor, raise your hands. Nice job, Tom.
And then also the two online.
Oh. I may not remember that.
Sorry, this is Tripp. I vote yes to both.
Appears to be unanimous. Okay, the Budget Committee ground rules. One page. I don't know that we need to read them one by one, but the important things I see here particularly is know the strategic plan and read ahead to get an idea of what's going to be discussed so you can be part of it. We want to have everybody be involved. And the other things that are just things that have come up before, sometimes individual budget committee members want to get particular information. The committee can do it, but the individual cannot. So you have to bring it up, we vote on it, and then we can get more if that's what happens. We will use Robert's Rules of Order, and let's focus on what we're trying to do with the big picture. I'd like everybody to treat each other with respect. And when I don't remember your name and I kind of point at you, I'm not being disrespectful, I just don't remember. So I admit that. Okay, so Aaron, would you deliver the budget message?
Chair, could we have a motion to adopt the ground rules?
Okay, yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, Josh, motion to accept the ground rules? I'm looking for, thank you, Jason. Okay, in favor? Perfect, unanimous.
So also, Chair, just as a potential runner, we've got the two online. Are you in favor of adopting the ground rules?
Tripp is yes.
Yes, Vanessa Auger.
And I'll probably forget that too, sorry.
To help with that, because we do have people online, they
Right.
have the ability to message a city recorder in the back. They'll put a hand up. So we made something visually stimulating for you to take a look at. When we do have someone, she has a little emoji hand she'll be putting up to get your attention when they have a
Thank you,
question or they
Chair.
want to make a comment. If that doesn't work, she'll come out here and dance or something to do a jig with it.
Okay, cool.
Okay. I didn't tell you about the jig part, did I? No, okay. Well, that might be necessary. All right. So, good evening. It's my pleasure to present a balanced fiscal year 23 budget representing the city of Grants Pass. This budget represents the ability for us to enhance community safety, invest in services and infrastructure, and provide for a strong quality of life while maintaining a strong commitment to financial responsibility of our citizens' tax dollars and resources. The proposed budget does recommend funding for programs and projects that will create a lasting impact in the lives of our community members. This budget is much more than just numbers. This budget is a reflection of council's goals, the community's goals, and policies moving forward in order to help our dreams come true. Today's budget message will consist of a couple of key items. First, an overview of the budget process. Then we'll go and talk about the budget documents and format. We'll address the levels of service and what council has defined as level of service, the budget parameters. I'll provide a budget summary so you'll sort of know what we're looking for when it comes to the other 3 budget committee meetings that we're going to be having. The budget summary will include that, and then preparing for the future and what we've done to prepare the budget. So the first is the overview of the budget process. Why are we here today? And really there's a key couple of things. One, we're establishing standard procedures for the allocation of resources for the city. Our budget outlines programs and fiscal policies that council has adopted and past budget committees have adopted. It does require in the budget process an estimate of resources and expenditures. It encourages citizen involvement. It's something that Oregon Revised Statutes relies on as part of this process. So every one of our meetings will provide an opportunity for the public to give comment on what was addressed for that evening. This also allocates resources, which puts a control of expenditure of public funds. Ultimately, what is approved by the budget committee and adopted by city council provides a control of expenditures. So the purpose of the budget committee is to receive the budget message, which you're hearing tonight, and the budget document, which you have in front of you. Provide members of the public an opportunity to ask questions about the budget document. Approve the budget document as submitted by the budget officer or as revised by the budget committee. And also an important role is to set the tax rate or amount needed to balance the budget. So phase 1 is the proposed budget. You're going to hear details about the documents that you have in front of you on May 10th, May 12th, and May 17th. I'll be providing a general overview today in the budget message, and also going over some of our lands and building capital projects that have an allocated proposed resource of $50,000 or more, or any new lands and building that's being proposed in fiscal year 23. May 10th, police, fire rescue, and community development is going to be on tap. That's under your public safety tab. Then we have public works. Jason has a whole evening all to himself. And then we'll conclude May 17th with the administration, finance, and the urban renewal agency. So phase 2 is approving the budget, which is scheduled for the May 17th budget committee meeting. Phase 3 is the adoption of the budget. After the budget committee approves the budget, it goes to city council, where city council adopts the budget. And then phase 4 occurs sometimes when there's changes after adoption. If there's any kind of needed changes, that goes in front of council, serving as the budget committee to make those changes. What is the budget? As I mentioned, the budget just isn't a group of numbers. It is truly a financial plan. We do our budget for a fiscal year, which means July 1 to June 30th. It's based on based on estimates of revenues and expenditures. Not all the numbers you see are set in concrete. A number of them are projections that we do a good faith estimate in order to provide you with a balanced budget. The budget is a basis for appropriations, which creates the authority to spend money. So in your book, just to give you an idea of what you're going to be looking at when we're taking a look at the individual budgets, you'll have a number of tables. And the tables basically provide revenues and expense category line items. So to break it down, you'll have a 2-year prior actual information, which is and what I did is we just pulled as an example on page 143, this is the parks maintenance service. It's not necessarily important that you turn to page 143, this is just an example. So the couple of slides here that I have is based on the parks maintenance service as an example. So what you'll see in all of those budgets is you'll see a breakdown, and for this particular item, this is expenses, and it's got 2 line items of personal services and materials and supplies. What you'll see is 2 prior year actual information. This is the audits done, this is exactly what we spent. So this is real concrete dollars, actual 20 and actual 21. You'll also see a revised budget for current fiscal year period if revised, but that's the budget fiscal year 22. That's the current year that we're in right now. You're going to see what we project at the end of that budget cycle. You're then going to see recommended budget for the upcoming fiscal year. That's where we're talking about here, fiscal year 23, and the allocation of resources. That's under manager recommended fiscal year 23. And then also you're looking at the projected budget for the second year, which is way over here on this line, projected fiscal year 24. And then these 2 are vacant because yet to be approved and yet to be adopted. One important piece move forward, and I might mention it also in the future, is when you're comparing numbers, you may want to take a look at comparing the recommended fiscal year 23 with maybe the fiscal year 22. The actuals are good and important for you to also have as a reference. But to look at an actual and then look at a recommended, there's a big number jump. And there's a reason for that. This is the actual of what we spent. And in most situations, in most cases, in every budget that you'll be reviewing, we usually don't expend the full allocated amount. There's usually underspending for some form or fashion. Maybe a project didn't get done that year, and so we saved $100,000. Or maybe an FTE retired, and it took us 3 months to replace that individual. That is a savings that goes back to those funds. And so we always project to spend the full amount, but it usually doesn't happen. So that's the big difference between the actuals, which are usually smaller in nature than either the budgeted 22 or the recommended 23. Service levels. Service levels are something that council defines, and they define that through a number of different ways, listening to the community through strategic planning. And I want to address a little bit about strategic planning and why and the budget reflects what it does. So council identifies the level of service and identifies the goals through a strategic planning process where they listen to all the advisory committees, they listen to staff, they listen to the public, they have their own concepts and ideas on what they'd like to have accomplished for the organization and for the community. From there, they take a look at and they prioritize those goals, and they adopt a strategic plan that identifies sort of where we're going to go and the dreams and the hopes of the community. After that strategic plan is adopted by council, staff works on what's called a work plan. That work plan really provides the meat and potatoes on how we're going to accomplish the goals. It takes a look at a goal and it says, what is it going to take to accomplish that? Is it going to require staff time? Is it going to require monetary resources? And so we apply, and how long is it going to take to make that happen? So that's the work plan provides additional details on how we're going to achieve those goals. Once that work plan is established, the beautiful thing about making this budget and what you have in front of you today is the budget that's proposed today to you is a direct reflection on the work plan, which is a direct reflection on the strategic plan, which is a direct reflection on the community's goals and council's desires and what they want to achieve. It makes budgeting relatively easy. We don't have departments fighting over resources. Oh, I want this money this year. No, I get it this year. It doesn't work that way. It's a nice way to present the budget to you because we already have where we need to put the resources. Council has defined that through level of service and through the strategic planning process. So here, the budget committee is the one that ultimately appropriates resources in association with the strategic plan. Once that's adopted, staff implements the work plan, and council and staff monitor and report the successes, and we do it all over again every year. So some of the things you're going to see and hear throughout the budget process is you're going to see these 5 goals, and you're going to see some of our objectives and some of our actions. So we have 5 main goals. The first is enhanced community safety. Next is to provide cooperative shared leadership involving council, staff, and the community. Encourage economic opportunities, facilitate sustainable manageable growth, and maintain and operate our infrastructure to meet community needs. Those are the 5 main goals. Those goals are supported by 22 different objectives, and those objectives are supported by 75 actions. And the strategic plan does have its own tab in your budget book, and it starts on page 62. Some of the key items that came out of strategic planning in fiscal year 22 is the first, permanent funding for police and fire rescue services, facilitate a managed urban campground, create kayak whitewater park in the river, use urban renewal to redevelop the Redwoods Hotel, appropriate resources to keep parks safe, clean, maintained for public use, and develop transitional housing or some kind of project turnkey. Those were the key 3 to 2-star items that came out of strategic planning, which were council's high priority. Council direction from strategic planning was to take a look at adjusting some of the levels of service provided by the general fund to maintain levels throughout and maintain levels throughout our other operating divisions. Capital projects and capital budgets follow council's work plan and meet the highest priority needs based on the strategic plan and the work plan. In fiscal year 23, general fund support will again be required to help police and fire keep their budgets neutral. Approximately $2.1 million this year of additional general fund dollars is needed to maintain a balanced budget for what we call public safety in the tab. All property taxes go to public safety. So when I say an additional $2.1 million, it doesn't mean public safety, police, fire, and support services is a $2.1 million budget. I'll talk about the budget here lately in a little bit. What it means is above and beyond property taxes, the general fund also provides $2.1 million to make them whole. So one of the things that the budget represents besides the strategic plan and the goals of council is it also has budget parameters associated with it, which helps make Developing the budget relatively easy also provides additional direction on where we need to put our resources. So some of those budget parameters are: one, we need to incorporate council's strategic plan into the budget. We need to maintain and improve our current service levels. Staff's direction is to hold the line on expenditures wherever possible. Some of our inflation expectations are somewhere between 3% and 6% represented in the budget, and it does impact certain budgets more than others. Look for both short-term and long-term savings. When it comes to utilities, which is enterprise funds, and I'll talk about, any extra resource above and beyond the operating costs of a utility after it's paid for, any additional above and beyond the 25% required operating contingency goes to capital. We're going to try to achieve a productive and efficient budget process like we have for the past 38 years, receiving our GFOA award. Some other financial policies to formulate additional budget recommendations is policies on contingencies, ending fund balances, transfers, etc. We have a great fund balance contingency guideline that provides us with good financial health and flexibility in case of emergencies. So this is on page 109 of your budget, if you wanted to turn to that as I talk a little bit about our fund compliance when it comes to contingency funds. So in general, adequate fund balance should be sufficient to provide for anticipated expenditures and operations for a given enterprise fund. When I say enterprise fund, I mean water, sewer, wastewater, transportation, stormwater, or the general fund. Now, the general fund has the highest contingency. Now, a contingency is basically sort of a reserve account, a bank account for that specific fund that can't be touched without council approval. It's there as a safety net. It's there to help us in times of reduced revenue or emergency type of situations. The general fund has the highest of 30 to 40%. There's a reason for that compared to some of the other ones. And part of that is the nature of how we receive general fund dollars. The majority of general fund dollars are property taxes. We have a fiscal budget season that starts July 1 and ends June 30th. However, we don't start getting property tax revenue July 1. We get the majority of our property tax revenue come November. So it's important for us to have a strong contingency, a bank account that we can utilize until we start to get those new revenues coming in. That helps us from a bond rating perspective. It helps us from being able to deal with the emergencies perspective. If we have an appropriate amount of contingency, we don't have to do inter-fund loans to keep the general fund operating until we get property taxes in November. A couple of points on this one. I accidentally pushed the button. So if you see the individual funds, they're in green and they're listed. Green is good. That means it's within their fund parameter. Say, for instance, general fund between 30 and 40%. We're sitting around 35, 36%. That's positive. If you go down fiscal year 23, water's in yellow. Yellow means, uh-oh. But in this case, yellow is a positive. Water is actually outside its fund balance because it's higher than 35%. But it's temporary in nature because they're actually receiving Urban Renewal Agency contributions for the debt service. One of the reasons why City Council established an Urban Renewal Agency is because it could help pay debt of up to 18% for water and wastewater projects. We're transferring some monies into that fund, which is upping the contingency, but that's temporary in nature. The other yellow for fiscal year 23 is administrative services. Again, this is somewhat of a positive. Administrative services is outside their fund parameter at the high end. We are a little higher than 25%, so we've adjusted and reduced the rates a little bit to try to get us back into that 15 to 25% for administrative services. So that's a relatively positive. We're not low trying to make up money, but actually we're trying to redistribute and make it appropriate to where we're fitting in the fund balances. So other budget parameters are personnel assumptions, and this is basically the same across the board for the majority of either the enterprise funds or the general fund. The same personnel categories are basically the same for inflation, health insurance, billed PERS rates, workers' comp, whether you're looking at police or you're looking at community development, those personnel assumptions are basically the same. All expenditures related to personnel are recorded in two categories, either wages or benefits that you'll see in your tables. Wages is the direct salary that employees are getting, where benefits are things like your medical, your workers' comp and payroll taxes, etc. So that's how they're split out. So the budget, just as a recap from a budget parameter perspective, it represents level of service as provided direction through council, through strategic planning. It also provides budget parameters associated with contingencies and other budget parameter rules that we have followed in order to maintain a healthy, balanced budget for your consideration tonight. So I'd like to get into the budget summary a little bit, give you some numbers and what you're going to be looking at in the future in the next 3 nights of your budget committee meetings. So total funds for fiscal year 23, our total budget is a little over $192 million. Of that, there are 3 basic big funds, and this is no surprise. If you look at most municipalities across the nation, there's 3 main big funds. There's your general fund, there's your enterprise funds, which are those funds that are paid for by your utility bills, and then there's the capital construction funds. Those are usually the 3 big ones for most municipalities. With us, the enterprise funds represent 38% of the $192 million. General fund operations, which include community development, parks, police, fire, support services, that represents 25% of those resources, with 17% representing the capital construction funds. The total budget, which includes all internal service funds, carryover balances, etc., as I mentioned, is $192,000. That is an increase from the fiscal year 22 budget that we're in right now. Of the $22.8 million increase, a large portion of that is the capital expenditure increase of $14.3 million. Why is that there? That's there because we're now starting to initiate and allocate resources to the largest capital project that the city has ever undertaken, which is the new water treatment plant. So we're preparing for those expenditures, and that represents the largest expense in that uptick in expenses, which is matched by revenue. Also, there is, from a PERS perspective, I know PERS is of interest to some, there is a contribution of PERS increase of $2.8 million. So about 3 years ago or so, the state did provide an option for cities to pay an additional into PERS, and if you did, you got a 25% credit on your PERS debt. So we signed up for that. There was only a few cities that got approved for that match from the state, but we weren't one of the top 15 or whatever. So they opened it up again, and because we were on that list and pre-existing, we were pre-approved. So we did have the $2 million that we're able to do that, which means that we're going to get an additional $500,000 of free money to go to our PERS obligations. So operating budget summaries can be found towards the beginning of the book on page 37, and that's where some of this information comes from. That is a really good page. The funding matrix and financial summary tab has a lot of good information in it, and I'll be referring to a number of those pages throughout the rest of the budget message. So what I just talked to you about was the whole budget, the total budget for the city. But that's not that'll give you a picture of something, but that's not really what it costs to operate the city on like a daily basis or a yearly basis. So that big number that you see in front of you includes all of your contingencies, all of your transfers, all of those things. It doesn't include really what does it take to run and operate the city. So I want to go over the operating portion of the budget. The operating portion of the budget doesn't include all of those internal charges, transfers, ending fund balance, etc. It just includes what is our costs, what are our revenues, how they match up to deliver the service. So we've got our current fiscal year budget of $44.4 million which is operating. It's proposed as a recommended budget of $48.9 million for the fiscal year 23. So that 2.8 million so increase is due to personnel costs due to contract changes and some other supports from external fundings and I'll go into this later, but the majority of that $2.8 million increase is due to FTE changes, which I'll highlight. So when it comes to operating revenues, remember, we're taking out contingency, we're taking out transfers to capital, those kind of things. Operating revenue, total program generated resources is $55 million. And property taxes, which is the 39% there that you see in blue, that represents about $21.6 million. The other one, which is red at 41%, is fees and charges. So the two major revenues that the city gets for operations comes from property taxes, which is in blue at 39%, and then your utility bill, the fees and charges that you see from water, wastewater, stormwater, transportation. That represents the other large chunk of revenue. So operating expenditures, where does the money go? For the most part, we are very FTE heavy. It requires boots on the ground to provide the services that we provide, especially when it comes to general fund operations. So 57.6% of the expenditures for operations is in personnel. Taking a look at that 50-some million dollars that we're looking at, where does all that money go? It goes to a number of different projects in both general fund and in enterprise funds. The biggest is public safety. Now that public safety is broken down by police, fire, and support services. Of that 20 plus million dollars that we're looking at to operate public safety, a little over 14 million goes for police, a little over 8 million for fire, and a little over 4 million for support services. So that's broken down into that category there. Parks and Rec, then you've got transportation, stormwater, water, wastewater, etc. But your largest expense for the city is the public safety services. We do budget for full capacity, like I mentioned, which means the dollars that are in the budget, we are budgeting a resource and we're budgeting an expense, and we're budgeting that the expenses would be spent by the end of the year. However, that's not the reality, and that sort of goes to reflect what I was talking about in the beginning with the actuals versus the proposed. For one reason or another, each year, there's usually some savings. And so we normally return about 6% savings back as an average between all departments. The operating budget for fiscal year 23 is up $4.4 million compared to fiscal year 22. The reason for that is competitive wage study adjustments and union contracts, increase in cost of contractual benefits for PERS, an increase in FTE to serving a growing city, and certain inflation in certain utilities and expenditures. Those are the four main reasons why we're seeing an increase in the operating budget of $4.4 million. One of the ones that I wanted to mention and highlight, because I think it's important that we highlight if there's any changes from an FTE perspective in order to maintain a certain level of service, is FTE changes. So in this current fiscal year, we had a few FTE changes that I want to highlight here. And they're listed at 4.5 increase. However, I think it's important to note that many of these increases are due to contractual replacements. For instance, recreation, we used to have a contract for recreation services that basically paid for 2 FTE to run that. We've taken that in-house. So now that means that we now have an FTE for that. Or say Augustus, our city attorney, we contracted out city attorney services. We now have an on-staff city attorney. So yes, we do have FTEs included there, but if you take a look at those, the majority of those are all just basically changing the way we're delivering the service. And we've taken a lot of those in-house now instead of having them as a contract. So FTE changes for fiscal year 23. Here's something I want to highlight. This is what's in the budget right now that we're looking at proposing. An increase of 1 FTE for building inspector. 3 FTE for 3 firefighters. Now this is a grant-funded program that would be for 3 years. The grant is funded for all 3 years with no obligation to maintain after the 3-year period. This money would not be spent if we don't get it. Those people would not be hired unless the grant is awarded. Municipal service worker in facilities. Municipal service workers in parks, 2 FTE. A personnel technician in HR, 1 FTE, and 1 police officer FTE with a minus of a 0.5 webmaster. So that's an increase of 8.50 FTE with about 3 of those being general fund. Police officer and municipal service worker parks, 2 FTE there. So total, if you take a look at the total budget, between fiscal year 22 and fiscal year 23, there's a net change of 13 FTE. But again, if we take a look at the true increase in FTE minus the contract change, we're looking at an increase of 5.5 FTE, with 3 of those being general fund, 2 parks and 1 police. So I want to highlight the general fund and its limited capacity for capital transfers. Over the years, over the past decade or more, the general fund has slowly started. Well, actually, the general fund was able to 7 years ago. The general fund had more flexibility. Over the years, the expense of services have outpaced the revenues the city received, as such that the general fund does not have the flexibility it used to have a decade ago. Maintaining the $1.79 levy was approved for a period of 3 years, and that does provide a key resource for public safety. But that $1.79, along with the permanent property tax, is not enough. As I mentioned, it requires an additional $2.1 million to make public safety whole. The Grand Spass Urban Renewal Agency is an important alternative funding source for some qualifying projects. That's important. But no specific capital projects have been allocated for the urban renewal dollars yet. Some that I project and that may be looked at in the future from council is Urban Renewal Agency to help with the swimming pool project. That's going to require some annexation into the Urban Renewal Agency, but that is, for instance, a project that may receive urban renewal dollars in the future. There is a contribution projected in the budget of when we get to it in the last night when we talk about Urban Renewal Agency of $3.5 million for water debt services. That's that 18% that I talked about earlier that helped offset, and that helps offset increases in water rates. The general fund should end fiscal year 23 with a healthy fund balance of about 35%. That's well within our 30 to 40% fund range that is for general fund. Capital transfers from the general fund include $40,000 for fire equipment replacement, $100,000 for fire facilities maintenance, $40,000 for police equipment replacement, and $5,000 from parks to turf replacement. You'll hear more of some of those items when we go through and review the capital that I'll be doing later after the budget message. So you'll see the link from the general fund revenues into the lands and building projects. This slide here is just to give you a general idea of property taxes because it's such a large source for general fund revenue. We're looking at and projecting a little over $21 million of property taxes coming in. That's from our permanent property tax rate, which gets us about $15 million, and the public safety levy at $1.79, which brings us in about $6.7 million. Again, just to dive down one more in property taxes, when we're talking about property taxes, what does that represent? The assessed value is made up of two numbers. The first number is in the existing properties, and was there any increase in the value of those existing properties? State law has set a cap on any increases in those properties to 3%. We're projecting a 1.8% increase in property values. We're also projecting a 1.5% increase for new construction. So any buildings, commercial, residential that comes online that is now included in our inventory does up our tax base. So the permanent property tax rate is the same at 4.1335. That is frozen by state law. And then there's the public safety levy at $1.79. We are entering year 2 of the 3-year levy for $1.79. Other general fund revenues besides property taxes, which is the key, are some other things like business tax licenses, right-of-way fees, fee in lieu of franchises, state revenue sharing. We're all projecting those going up just a little bit. The total general fund discretionary revenues is projected at $5.89 million. And as I mentioned, 2.1 would be earmarked for public safety. So general fund, focusing on general fund some more, where does the money go? Our main general fund departments is community development, parks, public safety, and then policy. Of the large general fund programs, public safety is the largest, receiving the majority of general fund dollars, followed by community development, and then followed by parks. Breaking it down even further, if you take a look at parks, community development, public safety, which is police, fire, and support services, and policy, if you break it down even further, okay, so that's where all the money goes. How is it broken out between those departments? The majority, as I mentioned earlier, is personnel. General fund operations are personnel heavy, which I'll show you a slide in just a few slides that shows something different for the enterprise funds. They are not as personnel heavy. They're heavier in other categories. General fund operations just takes people. It takes planners. It takes firefighters. It takes dispatchers. It takes individuals to provide the general fund services. So that is the largest expense. Other revenues, user fees, as mentioned, this is your enterprise funds, going from general fund operations now to enterprise fund operations. Enterprise fund operations, their major source is utility fees. What some people call the water bill. It's actually a utility bill because it encompasses much more than just charging for water. All utility rates are tied to a CPI, so they go up based on CPI index each year. We have phased in annual increases for water and wastewater and stormwater fees. Now, and specifically the water was phased in to increase 5.28% in both fiscal year 22 and 23, but we're not needing to do that because of the contribution from the Urban Renewal Agency that I mentioned earlier. It's allowing council to not have to raise the rates any further because of that 18% contribution coming from the Urban Renewal Agency. Of our enterprise funds that you see basically on your utility bill, the largest is water, followed by wastewater, and then streets and stormwater. A few years ago, stormwater was as small as solid waste, but over time with requirements in stormwater now that we're an urbanized area, et cetera, we've had to bolster that utility. Now, as I mentioned, when it comes to enterprise funds, they're not as heavy personnel-wise. So for police, we've got over, in police and support services, we have over 100 FTE. Now, water treatment plant, I think we have, what is it, 5 FTE? What's, Jason? 5 FTE. We have 5 FTE to produce clean drinking water for the whole city at millions of gallons a day. So it doesn't require a lot of personnel to do it, but it does require a lot of capital. A lot of capital goes into the buildings. A lot of capital goes into the pipes that are in the water that are either distributing the water or collecting the wastewater. And so that's where transfers, that's what the transfers represent. So from an enterprise fund, we're not super heavy personnel-wise, but we are heavy from a capital perspective. In looking at the budget that you have in front of you, there's a few things that have helped us prepare for the future that I wanted to highlight that represent the spirit of what you're looking at in the numbers. We have done a number of efficiency actions to help keep costs down, including things like student firefighter programs, community service officers, and the creation of the police cadet program to relieve police duties. So our police officers can focus on some of the higher level items, allowing the community service officers and the police cadets to work on some other items, freeing the police officers up. Staff participation in health insurance planning and cost sharing, negotiating a new health coverage company that provides us with lower rates, and also having staff sharing in increases and negotiating that in all the collective bargaining agreements. Responsible wage and salary changes, staff working to return budgetary savings. Staff's rewarded for returning money. It's not the old days. I know when I was in public works years and decades ago, it was like spend it or lose it. So come April of each year, we were sitting down, oh man, we better start buying trucks or we're gonna lose the money. That's not the way we operate here at the city. We're rewarded, and it's a good thing if you don't spend the money. It's okay if you don't buy the truck this year. It is a practice that we do every year. Continued efforts to assess and ensure effectiveness and efficiency in city operations, and the creation of a PERS reserve fund over the years has helped us offset any large rate increases as PERS was increasing over time. Other actions to keep costs down is we continue to embrace technology. It has been painful over the past couple of years, but to get a new system that helps with our utility billing and operations is a positive, because it provides an opportunity for the public to interface online. They don't have to come in to make payments. Contractors don't have to necessarily come into community development. We've got e-permitting process that's coming online. These things not only saves the customer time and energy, it also saves staff. Reducing handling time for checks received and payments, etc. Reduce travel time and administrative time through the use of police's CAD and MDT systems. That's computer-aided design and mobile data terminals. Having those online and hot, they can go around, they can do their work, they can just show up right next to the public safety building, download everything, and it's all taken care of. They don't have to get out, go hook something up. Those efficiencies save time and money. We also are really good at utilizing grants. And Susan Clark, who is our grant specialist, is a whiz, absolutely amazing. We've received so many great grants. And so we're great at utilizing those. We are an entitlement community for development block grant dollars. We don't have to compete every year with other communities. We get a certain amount each year, and council allocates those accordingly. We have a number of different dollar mountain projects that's received a lot of hundreds of thousands of dollars. We have various roads, parks, and other small grant projects. Firewise program, which helps with the wildland fire interface that we have, rural urban interface. That's a very important program. That's a grant funded program. We've had that for years. And of course, ARPA, I'm sure you've all heard of that. and our $9.3 million. Council is actually taking some formal action on looking at the allocation at their Wednesday night meeting of the $9.3 million. And then other things to keep costs down is trying to look at efficiencies within the organization. How can we combine services so we can play off of each other and reduce costs, such as combining recreation with downtown tourism office. Other actions in recent years we've done to improve our financial position is our ending fund balance policies in general fund. I was just talking with JC about different cities' ending fund balance and their contingencies. And for us to have a general fund contingency that's in a range of 30 to 40% provides us with that safety net and that flexibility versus some cities are operating at 5%. You're operating in an emergency if you only have a 5% contingency. So having these fund policies that councils established years ago has allowed us to be in a good position today and in the future as additional challenges hit the city. We have good investment policies, and because of all of these things, if and when we go out to bond, we have a lower bond rate, which ultimately saves the ratepayer money. Our financial policies has helped us maintain a level of essential services during our pandemic. We were able to move through it just fine. We were fully operational, and I definitely can't say that for a lot of other government entities. Another thing we do is from an organizational standpoint, we are and continue to try to strive to be a high-performing organization. We focus on our mission, vision, and values. We have created improvement teams to help focus on city services, innovation system improvements, internal communication improvements, organizational philosophy improvement, and strategic planning improvement. Some challenges ahead that I just want to point out. We are in the second year of a 3-year public safety levy. One of council's top goals is to come up with some kind of more permanent, sustainable revenue source for public safety. That permanent resource matching level of service is very important because, as I mentioned earlier, the general fund does not have the flexibility, and as we move forward in the future, that flexibility gets less and less to help support public safety above and beyond the property tax rates. Services available from the county that the city relies on, such as jail, juvenile, district attorney. Without those services, we could not perform the quality service that we provide to our citizens. That is a direct link to a system that needs to be whole, and that's an important piece, especially if the county is operating some of those programs off of a temporary levy, etc. Finding solutions to our revenue needs is important. Even if it's a county issue, we are all part of the county. Population surges in Grants Pass is another challenge. As the hub, we have an influx of population that's not quite double our general population, but it's a big population increase because a lot of commerce occurs here in Grants Pass. Therefore, our streets are more heavily used. Our parks are more used by both rural and urban county residents. And we have levels of service that are there providing those type of quality of life needs for Josephine County and our visitors. And we're always trying to expand our quality and quantity needed to serve a growing city as our population grows. We have a number of increased activities, especially in community development. It was Public Works a few years ago when gearing up for the water treatment plant, where on our council workshops and council meetings, it was it was Public Works. Recently, it's transitioned a little bit to more community development, and for good reason. There's so many things that is in the realm of community development, especially when it comes to affordable housing, other planning needs, parks. We are going gangbusters in all of those categories. And so that increased activity is something we need to look at how we're going to manage in the future. And then utility infrastructure obligations ahead. We have a significant investment that a lot of people don't recognize because you don't see it. those pipes that are in the streets themselves, millions of dollars of investment that we need to make sure we take good care of so we don't lose our investment that we have. We have to maintain those appropriately. And then also we need to plan for the largest capital expenditure in the city of Grants Pass's history. So those are some of those challenges ahead when it comes to public works. Managing healthcare costs is always an issue. That's not just a city issue. It's any company or corporation that has healthcare provided to its staff. Future periodic costs, identify anything that we can to set aside for future unavoidable costs. Some of that financial planning is important to maintain the health of the organization. Focusing good relations for our collective bargaining agreements, so when we get into labor negotiations, we can make sure that we're providing a contract that provides wages that attract and retain quality employees. And then the PERS rates, which we don't have control over, but we try to manage as best as possible, making sure that we flex and bend as those PERS rates change. In summary, the general fund and other operational funds are fiscally healthy, balanced, and financially stable. This is due to past council staff actions that have put us in a good position. Recommend we continue the fiscal conservancy and sound financial policies that we have, focusing on returning resources that don't need to be spent. Fiscal year 23 is a recommended balanced budget. Capital budgets address the major technical issues and council's priorities, which you'll hear part of tonight, but through a lot of other presentations, you'll see the capital projects are directly in line with council's strategic plan. And then we need to work to try to meet the challenges ahead as we maintain our quality service levels that the community has grown to enjoy. In conclusion to the budget message, I'd like to first do a huge shout out to Adam Schultz. Adam, you're online. He's been online for quite a while, and his services have been so greatly appreciated. His commitment to the organization when he chose to move on, his commitment to make sure that we had a quality person like JC come in to replace him, and he was not going to leave the helm until that time, is rare, and the quality of his work is absolutely amazing. So Adam, I can go on for a long time, but I do want to keep the meeting to maybe 9 o'clock if we can, so I'll stop here. And then Mindy Ellerman stepping up, just been great. Adam and Mindy and the rest of the crew, department heads, etc. Thank you very much for helping make this presentation easy for me to give to the budget committee. Fiscal year 23 the teamwork is just great. And after a successful budget season this year, we'll be able to submit for our 38th annual GFOA Distinguished Budget Award. So with that, I'd like to say that I thank you, and I look forward to the budget process. I look forward to working with our colleagues, working with the budget committee, and working with the public to provide a balanced and fiscally strong fiscal year 23 budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. Do we have any questions? Please.
A couple. Number one, you've looked at your increase in property tax for existing dwellings at 1.8%. You know, inflation's running 15 or 20. I know you can't go more than 3, but has Connie Roach given you any different guidance why that 1.8 shouldn't be much closer to 3%?
So I'm going to have Adam chime in because the 1.8 came from Adam on that.
And let me ask you, he'll get this question as well. You're projecting 3 to 6% inflation with CPI running currently over 8. Why did you collect that number?
So to answer the first question, I don't have an updated estimate on what the assessed values might be for the coming year. Each year we try and budget our expenditures essentially for the worst case scenario and also conservatively estimate our revenues. So I think I would wholeheartedly agree with you that I hope that the assessed value, well, from the city's revenue perspective, hope that the assessed value does increase more than the 1.8%. But at this time, to project much more than that might be too much of a reach. So the 1.8 is just us being very conservative with those estimates. The other part of those property taxes is the increase based on new development, and we get that from the planning and building departments to see what kind of permits have been pulled and what the valuations on those new projects are. However, the timing of the completion of those projects can also have an impact on what we actually see from year to year. So same thing as existing properties. We just try and be conservative on those so that we don't tell you, the budget committee, that we are expecting more revenue than we actually receive. Refresh me on your second question, if that answered your first.
Inflation, where you budgeted 3 to 6%, and we're currently running between 8 and 9 as a nation.
Right. So the consumer price index increases that we see year to year, based on last year's activity, we increased our fees with a CPI increase of only 3.77%, which, similar to your question, is not really following current CPI levels. A lot of the estimates that we use in this process are several months old and are oftentimes based on individual research by all of the departments to find out what they think their costs are actually going to be. So 3 to 6, you're right, very well may be a bit low. However, our budgets also include just a little bit of additional flexibility to hopefully be able to withstand even higher inflation increases.
Some of that also is controllable, meaning, as mentioned in the general fund, a large portion of our expense is personnel, and that personnel is associated with collective bargaining agreements, which for the most part we know year 2 or year 3 of the collective bargaining agreement, and a range that is there, like the collective bargaining agreement saying between 3 and 6%.
Josh?
Thank you very much. I think there's going to be departments that actually have more impact, such as if they use a lot of fuel, if you're doing construction. Have you guys done a kind of a risk analysis of exactly where those departments are going to be the heaviest impacted, and how you can kind of build in more flexibility for those probably likely 7-8% year increases?
That's a great question. Yes, we have projected for some of that, and that'll be highlighted in some of Jason's presentations. But for instance, it's I think it's under shop or fleet. If you take a look at one of the line items, it's increased quite a bit, and you're like, oh my gosh, what's that increase from? It's from our expected increase in gas costs. So we're trying to project out some of those increases, yes.
I'm sorry, Karen, thank you.
Tripp has a question.
Hello. So I have a question about the ending fund balances. Those targets seem right for the explanation you provided about needing cash to bridge from July when the fiscal year starts to November when property tax revenues come in. But is there any possibility we can see reporting on the cash balances in those accounts to see how low the cash balances actually get?
We certainly have those. I suppose my question would be what you're trying to ascertain from that.
I think it goes along the lines of, it makes sense that if you have no other source of funding from July through November, when you start seeing property tax revenues, you need probably about 120, 140 days of cash on hand to pay the bills in the meantime. But come October 15th, if there's still 100 days of cash left in the bank, we actually haven't drawn down any of those balances to pay the bills we thought were coming in. We're just running with a whole lot of cash.
So overall, we've mostly focused on that fund balance policy. There are a lot of things at the end of the year that depend on what we've booked as liabilities, in which case we may have the cash, but we already owe it to someone as of the end of the year. So that's why we've mostly focused on the fund balance as opposed to the cash balance analysis.
Cool.
Tom?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up with that. There is a beginning fund balance, I believe, that should be in cash. And for fiscal 23, Adam, the beginning fund balance is what?
So the beginning fund balance, what we essentially start with is what we know our beginning fund balance for fiscal year 22 is. And we know that because that number has been audited and is part of our annual comprehensive financial report. We then take a look at all of the revenues and expenditures that we've received to date, and that's usually through about January whenever we start putting these numbers together. After that, we use that information kind of looking at how things have gone so far this year and what type of expenditures and revenues we can expect throughout the rest of the year to project through the end of the current FY22 budget year. And that's where we get those beginning balances for the recommended 23 budget. So there are a lot of assumptions built into those beginning balances and ultimately setting those at a conservatively reasonable level, but also allowing the flexibility for council to adapt to things as they come up is kind of some of the objectives that we try and accomplish with that projected number.
So on page 33 of your budget, you'd be able to see the projected recommended fiscal year beginning balance of $13,766,000 with a total general fund of the $48,929. That's on page 33.
And in addition to that, about 3/4 of the way down, there's also the restricted beginning balance for building and safety, as well as economic development, which is currently at 0, and as well as the tourism beginning balance. And that's based on, again, a projection, at this point, a 3-month-old projection of additional lodging taxes that we believe we'll receive and we'll be able to transfer into the tourism budget. And likely most of those will be unspent. So there's a couple of different lines on page 33 that show the different beginning balances within the general fund.
Tom?
Just to follow up one more time, Adam. The beginning balance is 13.7 million, right? And it appears that property taxes will be just under 21, and we need about 1/3 of that. 7, and we start with 13. Isn't that enough cash?
It should be enough cash to us, which is why our fund balance policy is between 30 and 40%, because if we can hit that fund balance policy, then we have a fairly significant level of confidence that we'll be able to continue operating before we start receiving those large property tax revenues in November and December.
Just as another 2 cents, if you go 2 columns to the right, that $11 million, that's approximately what the estimation of that ending fund balance is of fiscal 23. So if you see that kind of, the roll forward.
Questions? I'm sorry, are there questions? Tom?
Sorry, I wanted to ask about the grant-funded firefighter positions. Are those going to be designated as temporary, or is there a plan to fund them within the general fund after the grants end? Or how is that going to work?
That is yet to be determined. That'll be determined at some point in time with council and the level of service, this is an opportunity for us to receive 3 additional FTE for fire, which provide us an opportunity to take a look at the service level of having 3 to an engine versus 2 to an engine. We're at minimum staffing levels right now with fire at 2 to an engine. With the additional 3 FTE, we can take, like, say for instance, Parkway, and have that designated as a potentially 3 to an engine with these new 3 new FTE. So it'll give us an opportunity to see what that level of service may provide. And ultimately, that's a council decision that would need to be made in the future.
Other questions? Yeah.
So looking at the beginning of a fund balance, it looks like here we're kind of going down about $2.5 million in beginning fund balance from this recommended budget to the projected 2024. Is that you guys being overly conservative and just not wanting to like project out a lot of revenues, or are you actually kind of eating into what I would call the quote unquote the savings in order to balance the budget for 2023?
I think it's probably a little bit of everything, but it also has to go towards the proposed versus actuals. If you look at the actual numbers or the proposed, so it's not the firm numbers that you have in the actuals in the other 2 columns, and so if we were to fully spend what was allocated, that's the number we would think we would be looking at, but the likelihood of us fully spending every line isn't there.
Other questions? Aaron, do you want to take a break before we move on?
I can move on. I've got it up. I can go.
Okay, go.
Okay. So this next one is fun. We are going to talk about and give you an idea of actually looking at some numbers tonight. So one of the things we thought was important in the budget process, and this has been going on for the past couple of years, is to highlight the lands and building projects that received $50,000 or more, or any new lands and building projects, so you have an idea of what's in the budget. So I'm going to be talking about just the lands and buildings. There's a number of other capital projects that are going to be set aside that we'll be talking about, but it won't be me talking about it. It'll be someone like Jason talking about some of the projects that he's got going on that have large funds when it comes to the Public Works Night. I'm just speaking today about the lands and building, which is a lot of the general fund type of operations. So some projects use restricted resources while others are funded by general fund transfers. And that'll be seen in your lands and building, in your capital book. And so we are sort of transitioned from the big budget book to the capital book, if you want to go and take a look at some of the capital items here. So allocation of general fund dollars are limited, as I mentioned. There was a few of those. There was about 4 or 5 items that I mentioned that were there, and you'll see those in some of these lands and buildings that I'm talking about. Public Works capital projects will be reviewed during Public Works operations, because those are funded by restricted utility capital type of enterprise funds. Understanding project resources and requirements. I wanted to take a couple of slides just to walk through with you what you're looking at from the tables. They're a little bit different than the big budget document. So we are all on the same page and we understand what the numbers mean when we're looking at them. So we'll start here with understanding resources and requirements. This is a typical table that you'll see in the budget document. This is actually page 121 of your capital book, and that's what I'm utilizing as an example to walk through with you what these columns mean in the tables. So each capital project has resources and requirements. The resources are your revenues and your requirements are your expenditures. There's one column which is fiscal year 21. That's actual through fiscal year 21. And then there are 2 columns. There's a fiscal year 22 adopted and a fiscal year 22 estimated. So, taking a look at this, what is through fiscal year 23? Through fiscal year 23 column is right here. I've got it highlighted here. So what does that number make up? The through fiscal year 23 makes up the actual through fiscal year 21, and then it makes up the estimated fiscal year 22, and then it represents the recommended fiscal year 23. It's the sum of those three categories. That's what the through fiscal year 23 means. Now that one's sort of hard to show as an example because there's only one item. So let's go down to requirements and let's do the same thing for requirements. What is this? Where did we get this 343,236? You got that number from one, the actual fiscal year 21, adding the estimated fiscal year 22, and then also adding the recommended fiscal year 23 gets you what we're looking at for a through fiscal year 23 column. And this is true for both resources and requirements. We also have a total projects column at the very end. Walking you through that, what does that mean? That takes the through 23, so if we look at the requirements, expenditures through fiscal year 23 of 343,000. You then take 56,000, you take the projected 24, and any foreseeable future cost that might be gives you the total project cost at the end. So that's what that column represents. So again, just to go through, the through fiscal year 23 represents the actual fiscal year 21, the estimated, the recommended, that's the total. Total project is the through fiscal year 23, fiscal year 24, and any future, and that's your total project. Now, how do we come up with our ending fund balances when it comes to the LB projects and other capital projects that will be referred to? So, the estimate ending fund balance for fiscal year 22 takes the through fiscal year 21, which is the 19,126. It adds the estimated resources, because it's a resource of fiscal year 22. So you take the 19,000, you add the 50,000, and then you subtract the 60,000, which is an expense, which gets you $8,764 as the ending fund balance. So you take basically the carryover plus the new revenue minus the projected expense, and you get the carryover for the estimated fiscal year 22. You basically do the same thing when it comes to your how did we come up with fiscal year ending balance 23, which is the budget that we're looking at today. It's basically the same thing. We take the estimated ending balance, we add whatever revenues we have in fiscal year 23, subtract the expenditures, and you get your ending balance for the year. I know that was a step-by-step thing, but I've found that helpful. So that's sort of how to look at these numbers moving forward when we're talking about not only tonight, but some of the other capital projects that Public Works and others will show you.
Aaron?
Yeah.
It says future. How far in the future are you making that? How much of a guesstimate is that? Are you looking 5 years out or 1 year out, or?
If we could track out the project and what we think is in the project, then we'll do the future. It could be that's an additional 2 years. It could be that that's just an additional year. But if we know the project is a 4-year project, but this budget only represents 2 years, we're going to try to throw in an additional 2 years with that. So there isn't a real rule of thumb. All right, now we're going to talk about reviewing the LB projects that are either that have a transfer of $50,000 or more, or any new LB projects that have been created to represent an alignment with the strategic plan and council's goals. The first one in your capital book can be seen on page 114. This is existing park and sports facility rehab. Wait first to turn that, I'll turn to it also so I know about how long it takes to. 114. So what we're looking at for this one is an addition of $160,000 lodging tax. In fiscal year 23, this program will continue to improve and repair park facilities, including skate park, Long Ridge Park, etc. And then if the total is, a little under $2 million. Future and ongoing costs. This is an ongoing thing for ongoing maintenance and improvements provided through park services. A great example of money being spent for this is if some of you, have any of you been down to Reinhardt Volunteer Park to see the new pickleball courts, tennis courts? If you haven't, it's amazing. The optics of it is insane. It's great. It looks wonderful, and people are just packed playing pickleball at Reinhardt Volunteer Park. But that's an example of what these project allocations go for. They go to help maintain and operate and expand our infrastructure in the park system. Like mentioned, the skate park needs some rehabilitation, so there's going to be some money going for that and those kind of park infrastructure needs. And I'll pause here, Chair, to see if there's any questions specifically on this one before I move on to the next one.
Questions?
The next one is LB 6228. This is on page 116 of your capital book. This is Alternative Fuel Facility Design and Implementation Plan. This one has been in the book for a little while, and it was created in 2014, which it shows up on the top corner there on page 116. We're looking at $100,000 for a federal grant, $12,000 in additional contributions. This project really is planning for a long-term, to help reduce long-term fuel costs by providing an alternative fuel source for public and private commercial fleets. So the construction of the eventual alternative fueling facility would likely require additional CMAQ allocations, and that is through our Middle Rogue MPO. Valerie can probably talk to you all about that if you want details on the MPO or myself, but this is a project that ultimately would help not only the city but other commercial fleets providing alternative fuel sources, but the study would need to take place.
Questions? Brian?
Yeah, so we've had this on the books since 2014. Are we anticipating that we will be able to get that study started this year?
Yeah, for fiscal year 23, I think that's possible that we could do that. Yeah, it's from a standpoint of the city staff time, it's going to require some contract work to be done. This is a very specialized field.
Yeah, I would assume we wouldn't be doing it in-house. We would be sending it out. Do we feel that that amount is adequate for the study?
Go ahead, Jason.
So the other piece of that is we have to be awarded that grant through the MPO, and we have not yet got that, and there's several other projects that are in the queue vying for those dollars. So we have not actually received those dollars.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Jason.
Other questions? Go ahead.
The next current LB project is LB 6327. This is on page 121 of your capital book. This is technology lifecycle management. We're looking at providing an additional $60,000 for our information technology fund. This provides us the opportunity to purchase new hardware and software and replace existing hardware and software. Like I mentioned, this is something that helps us provide efficiencies within the system, but is also expensive to maintain and keep up to date. And so that's why this LB project was created.
Questions? Go ahead.
So the next one is LB 6343. This is on page 122. This is park land acquisition. This one's pretty straightforward. It's for park land acquisition. We're looking at $70,000 of parkland system development charges. So the city does receive system development charges, and we do assess a fee for that. That is specifically for purchase of future park land. And this is just something that's been ongoing, and it provides us an opportunity to have a dedicated resource for that.
Question, Brian?
So those, that $70,000 of SDCs, that comes through, can you just describe that, how that revenue comes in? Is that from development?
It's an estimate on what we believe would come in from the system development charge that is charged to development as they come through community development. So community development, just like a water or wastewater system development charge, there's also a park system development charge to pay their impact to coming into the system.
Thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead.
The next one is LB 6352, which is on page 125 of your capital book. This is the Reinhardt Park Complex turf replacement. As you may recall, a couple of years ago, we did put in a turf field, the soccer field in Reinhardt Volunteer Park. And the turf field has a life expectancy of approximately 10 years. So in order to make sure that we can replace that in the future, this LB project was established. We're looking at $5,000 general fund coming from the parks and $45,000 of park development SDCs to help build a reserve for at some point in time, future replacement of the turf soccer field.
Questions? Go ahead, Aaron.
Okay. So the next one is LB 6388, surplus property sales. We're looking at $1 million sale of assets. That is just a general number to provide some flexibility for council and anticipation of potential sale of property. During fiscal year 2020, the city's PAVE committee did perform a review of all city-owned properties that were not developed or currently in some kind of city operation. Certain properties were identified to be sold, and council has identified some of those properties to sell. This is a fund that is put in hold for those sale of properties.
Okay, Jason? I'm sorry, yes.
Where does the Henderson gas station fall in this? Is it going to be developed, or is it going to be for sale?
So the former gas station property was purchased because it's contiguous to other city-owned property, and at the time was deemed as an important piece for the potential future growth of municipal services building or something along those lines, or additional parking, etc. There has been some discussions. It has probably dropped down on the priority list of things for council consideration. There's a number of things that have jumped up in front of it, but ultimately it's going to be on hold there for future city development, and then a potential use until such time would need to be discussed and identified by council.
I understand that, but there's $500,000 of sunk cost that I see no return in any way to the city based on what you just said. Hopefully downstream we can use it. Is that?
Yes, it's planned for future municipal use.
Tom?
In terms of property sales, if the property sold is part of Parks Reserve and was purchased with Parks SDC money, would it be funneled through this account, or would it go directly to park land acquisition?
It would have to go back to parks. There are some properties that are general fund in nature, and there are some properties that have a specific park. They were in the park master plan or something along those lines, and they would need to be reimbursed to the park fund.
So in this case, this would apply only to sales of property that are not part of the Park Reserve?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead, Aaron.
All right, we have LB 6418, which is on page 148 of your capital book. This one is Enterprise Resource Planning Replacement. So We've got budgeted $75,000 from the Administrative Service Fund going into this. Current software has an annual cost of around $100,000 per year with increases each year, but this is really to help with our enterprise resource planning system, which is considered an ERP. We currently have Tyler/Munis as that. It's a key component to the operations. It's really the HAL of the city. And so it needs to be maintained and operated appropriately and ultimately upgraded someday. And that's a very expensive project, so we need to set aside resources for that.
Questions? Go ahead, Aaron.
So I've got a couple of new ones that I wanted to highlight for you that are in.
Aaron?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, it looks like Tripp had a question.
Yep. Yeah, I did. So that last LB, the ERP replacement, I mean, is it fair to characterize that as kind of like a sinking fund? You know, we're stashing cash away for replacement services or replacement of an asset? Hello?
Aaron, I can answer that.
What's that?
I would say yes.
Yeah, okay.
It's absolutely an attempt to set aside funds for future replacement of our current software. The alternative to doing this on an annual basis with smaller annual dollars is to, at some point 15 years from now, to suddenly need an additional $1.75 million. Of course, that's very much just an estimate, and who knows what that actual cost will be years from now.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, so seeing this is a sinking fund, we are taking cash and setting it aside. I mean, this particular project is pretty exemplary in that, you know, it's looking like at least 20 years before, or at least, I'm not sure how much is in that fund at the moment, but if we're assuming we're starting from zero this year, that's, you know, 20 years worth of deposits on that. I assume those deposits are earning interest over the intervening period, and if so, does the interest earned on those deposits, so to speak, have to be allocated directly to this project, or does it go back into the city's general fund?
Any interest earned on unspent funds within the lands and buildings projects becomes usable resource within the land and buildings capital fund. Right. We used to very specifically track the interest on each capital project, and then a project would have an extra $2,300. So it ended up being more work to maintain than the benefit it was providing, versus there's some extra interest with no restrictions on it, and whichever project needs some more funds, there are some available within the fund.
So what kind of one final question on that then would be, okay, so let's say we have a similar long-term sinking fund for something that's ultimately got to be paid for out of the general fund. As that earns interest, I mean, in theory, that could taper off, you know, let's say the council wants to budget $100,000 a year for 30 years to replace something out of the general fund. The fact that those deposits are earning interest basically means that, okay, over time, that $100,000 contribution becomes less and less as the interest accumulates.
The funds that are set aside in the project wouldn't reduce in amount. Of course, there's inflation to consider, but this particular method is just an attempt to distribute the total cost of capital in the future over multiple years, so that you don't see one year with a significant increase in budget with funds that you may or may not have at a given point in the future. So this is just a plan that's set aside for that.
Cool.
Other questions? Go ahead, Aaron.
All right, so a new project, LB 6420, which is on page 150 of your capital. Hillcrest Training Expansion. We're looking at acquiring a $75,000 state grant. There is a relatively good-sized grass piece of property next to Hillcrest Fire Station that's on the east side that would be ideal for training, increase our current training facility that's at Hillcrest. There's a number of things that are already there in place. This would be an expansion of that, utilizing that property. And again, we would do this if we get the grant.
Questions?
Where's the grant coming from?
I don't have that detail. I don't know if Adam does. I'm not sure what granting agency we're applying for this.
It says state grant in the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, Aaron, I don't have that specifically named state grant available at the moment. It might take me some time to look that up.
Okay. We're okay? All right.
Maybe later. Go ahead, Aaron.
Okay. So the next new project is LB 6421. This is on page 151 of your capital. City yard needs analysis and preliminary design. This is a big one that Jason can answer any questions to, but we're looking at doing a project that is basically a needs assessment of the city yard. I think we are doing a tour, a capital tour or something at some point. Yeah, and I don't know if we're going to do a tour of the yard. I think we can always swing by maybe, but if any of you had a chance to go out to the yard, it is a little dysfunctional when it comes to the services that we provide. There's things that are just inadequate or inefficient, and so what this does is it's setting aside resources from all the utility funds that are utilizing this facility to come up with a preliminary design for the yard and how we can maintain better efficiency and use of that current property.
Questions? Valerie?
Yeah, I just had a question. Didn't we had a study done, am I correct, in the last year? And is this one of the ones that rose to the top of that study with asset management? Is that what it was?
It will. We have received the first draft of that study, made some suggested edits back to the consultant. They had missed some pretty large deficiencies in a couple of the facilities. They went back and reviewed their notes and their photos and agreed with us that they had missed a couple of deficiencies. So they are working those back into the plan. But the city yard, I mean, it's met our needs for quite a while, but we have a lot of people crammed into a very small space. We just really need to look at what do we actually need there for the work that we're asking to be done. And then come up with a master plan of what do we need to build at what time. That'll give us the tools we need to then say, how do we fund that project?
Thank you. Brian?
It's not really a question, it's more of a comment. The study we did last year was, I think, $550,000, and this study's $400,000, and it just seems exceedingly expensive for what it is.
Okay, go ahead, Aaron. Oh, yeah.
One more quick question on this topic. Will this involve hiring a consulting firm to look at alternatives and make a report?
It will. We'll also consult with the county. One of the things that we've had is ongoing discussions about whether or not there is some potential benefit to co-locating county, state, and city facilities. Of course, there's always whose site, and all of those issues, but part of it will include that. But it really will look at what do we need, how much acreage, how many buildings, how many people will be situated there. It will be pretty comprehensive. But it could involve relocation as well, Tom.
It seems like a good opportunity to talk about alternative energy also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Josh?
So there was mention that there was a $500,000 project that was done before, and then there's this new one that $450,000. Can you explain kind of what the difference is and why you need the second one?
Yeah, absolutely. So the initial study was strictly a facility condition assessment on all city facilities. So we hired a consulting firm to come in and evaluate this building, City Hall, public safety, every facility within the city. They then come up with what's called a facility condition index for every building, a list of known deficiencies, and help to lay out a capital plan. We're going to be presenting that, I'm guessing, within the next couple months to council. As just a spoiler alert, the number is large. We have a large number of buildings that have some significant work. The great news is our condition is not nearly as bad. Again, spoiler alert. The Cliff Notes version is they're not as bad as we would have thought for as long as we've gone without a lot of preventive maintenance, but there is a lot of preventive maintenance we need to catch up on. So this next one is strictly one facility. What jobs do we need to do on that facility? How many people do we need to locate? What equipment needs to be there? What supplies need to come in and out? How do we secure it? It really is about how do we function on a piece of property.
Thank you, Jason. Any questions? Oh, no, just thank you. Go ahead, Joel. Aaron.
Okay. The next one is facilities maintenance for fire. We're looking at $100,000 general fund. This project is to create a fund to help with facility maintenance. Currently, there are several items that we know that need to be repaired and or replaced at the Parkway Fire Station. It's one of our premier stations, and it does need some maintenance, and so this project is for that.
Brian?
So this particular project, is this, I see it's general fund for fire, is this in addition to the operating budget general fund requirement?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Aaron?
All right. Here's another new one, LB 6429. It's on page 153 of your capital. It's Residential Construction Excise Tax Program. There's also another one, 6430, which is next. They're basically the same thing, but City Council has adopted a construction excise tax on development, and that's a 0.5% on permitted values of $50,000 or more. These monies are set aside for affordable housing projects and to help incentivize affordable housing. We need to make sure we track that and appropriate it according to the state law and the code that council adopted. So this is the new LB 6429 associated with the affordable housing CET when it comes to residential construction excise tax.
Questions? Valerie?
Yes, I was just looking at the breakdown. Does that go back to the breakdown of the percentages that we spent, some of it for,
Yeah, it'll be available to what council has identified in the breakdown of your ordinance that created this. But from this perspective, this is just the account where it is. When we go to spend it, it needs to be in compliance with the
right,
ordinance.
and I'm just saying, so when you broke it into the two, one being incentives and the other, that was broken down, so the total is those two together is what you're expecting, am I correct? So yeah, so it looks like that's how it was broken down, because I know there was a percentage that had to go for incentivizing, and the other part I had to do was something else, and then I think a certain percent has to go back up to the state for the
oh yeah, the state gets their cut.
15%.
Yes.
So that's the total, and I guess it does look like it does add up. So I guess that answers my question. And I look at the adding of the two categories.
Other questions? Go ahead, Aaron.
The next one really is basically the same thing, but this is for the commercial aspect. There's two different construction excise taxes. One is a residential and one is a commercial. And so this is serving the same purpose as the residential.
Questions? Go ahead, Aaron.
The next one is new LB 6431, Gilbert Creek Park Play Structure Replacement. We have an anticipation of $75,000 state grant, $15,000 lodging tax as an allowable use, and this project would include the purchase and installation of a new playground equipment at Gilbert Creek.
Questions? Go ahead, Aaron.
That concludes my presentation of lands and buildings projects of $50,000 or more allocation or brand new this year for fiscal year 23.
Tom?
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, I had one question on, sorry, I had one question on a couple that weren't listed in the slides because they didn't meet the $50,000 threshold. But there's two other projects, LB 6396 and 6397, which are fire and police equipment replacement, and those are each slated for $40,000. And it looks like that's slated to come out of the general fund. So it's similar to my previous question. I'm assuming that those amounts are not accounted for in the operational budget for public safety?
They're accounted for to be spent out of this LB project.
Right. So it's in addition to in the operating budget book. So these three projects are another $180,000 from the general fund to public safety that are not in the operating budget. Is that right?
Counselor, if I may, if you want to look at page 123 of the recommended operating budget, that's where the financial summary is for fire rescue. And you'll see that one of the lines in their requirements section is transfers out. And for fiscal year 2023, you'll see transfers out $140,000. That is the transfer of the $100,000 to the fire maintenance project and $40,000 to the fire equipment project. So it is identified in the operating budget as well.
Great, thank you.
Questions? I think you've done it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So now the next item is to ratify the budget hearing schedule. And I don't have a handout for you, but we know it's...
I'm pulling it up right here on the screen for you, Chair.
Okay.
There you go.
Perfect. So as we can all see, next meeting's next Tuesday the 10th with the Police, Fire, Rescue, and Community Development. And then we have Jason's big day on the 12th. And on the 17th, Administration, Finance, and Urban Renewal Agency. Will we get a little more detail on that online?
So what we can do is, what we did for you today is we can get out the presentation for you in advance, so you can have that and be prepared, so you'll know sort of what page numbers we're going to be trying to highlight,
Right.
and match that up with the budget.
That's what I meant, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Excellent.
Yeah.
You just sent that out electronic, right?
Yeah, we'll send that out as a
Okay.
PDF to your email.
Okay. At this point, do we have any public comment or questions? Do we have any general requests or for information or other things that the committee wants? Not an individual, but if we as a committee want it, this is the time to request it. Tom?
One of the topics that I think might be interesting for the Budget Committee would be to discuss cash management, and I'm not sure where that fits in the schedule of our meetings, but we're in a period of rapidly changing interest rates, and the cash deposits of the city are substantial with the grant funds and the reserves that have been accumulated. It looks like every basis point would bring in about $8,400, and we should be able to get 10 basis points right now with a little more active cash management. that a subject that is possible for us to discuss, or is that for management?
I think we can address that either as and Adam and JC, I'll follow up, have you follow up, either as just a memo to the Budget Committee, or we could try to address it at the May 17th meeting, but I think it sounds like it might be just more of a memo information for you.
Excellent. Other questions or concerns? Josh?
Kind of piggybacking on that a little bit, I did take a look at the credit rating for the city, and there are opportunities to even increase that credit rating from where it's currently. I wanted to know what the feasibility of that was. What are there any financial constraints for us to be able to do that? Because that once again can help us with borrowing and basis points and things along those lines. So again, if that could be included in the memo, that would be really helpful.
So Chair, ultimately, after this has been discussed out, if you could call for a motion to make sure that all of the Budget Committee would like to receive that information,
That's right.
then we'd be
We
more than
can't
happy
do
to
it
put
for
something
individuals.
together.
So would one of you make a motion?
I would make that motion.
Good luck, Karen. Can I get a second to make it?
I'll second the motion.
Yeah.
There you go.
I think the intent is that there will be a management letter, a memo to the Budget Committee regarding cash balances and credit rating.
Correct, yes, that would be it.
Okay.
Yeah, and during the discussion, what I'd like to do is just call out to make sure that Adam and JC have a decent enough understanding of the motion to go ahead and move forward with a memo, or if not, this would be the time to ask for additional clarity on expectation of what information would be provided.
And I would also like to make one addition that the memo to also address the opportunity to improve the credit rating or anything that is hurting our ability to improve that credit rating, either now or in the future. Does that make sense? I'm also more than willing to get nasty text messages in the middle of the night, so you're more than welcome to do that too if you need clarification.
I'm glad you shared. And Adam can jump in here too if I'm not understanding correctly, but you want to make sure that the city is managing our cash balances and investments in a way that gives us the most return, as well as showing those cash balances in a way that are hopefully going to improve our credit rating in the future.
Correct, and anything that's holding our credit rating from being increased to its maximum level.
The most recent statement that I saw showed cash balances of about 84 million. And the financial policies that are in place allow for a wider range of short-term investment instruments than is currently being used. And particularly if there were an effort to increase the yield without increasing risk, it would seem to me to be a good idea. And so I'd like to have a discussion of how those decisions are made and whether or not there's agreement that there might be latitude to increase the return, the yield, without increasing risk.
Just as a short answer before you get probably a more detailed memo, there's only certain things that a city can invest in, and there's only certain things that we can do as a percentage of total investment. So we are locked in at certain things in our portfolio, not being 100% corporates, not being 100% U.S. Treasuries. So we are restricted by ORS on that.
And we're well within those limits.
Correct.
So could we try to get it maybe at least handed out to look at or get online before the 17th, so maybe we can mull it over a little bit?
Yeah, that would be the intent, and that if there was
Maybe by
any
the
discussion based
12th
on
or-
that, it would be the May
Yeah.
17th that would most likely fit
Yeah.
well.
So did everybody understand that brief, concise motion? And if not, what's wrong with you? Oh, I'm sorry. So, is there discussion on the motion? Okay. Oh, go for it, Jason.
Just for point of understanding of what we're asking for here, not to influence necessarily asking for it, do you have a just spitball back of the envelope estimate on level of effort that we're asking of you here?
So I can give what might be much of the answer you're asking for. Like JC mentioned with the restrictions that we have of what we can invest in, for the first 7 or 8 months of the fiscal year, the local government investment pool has actually been our best option, in which case, for those who have looked at the report, you'll see that most of our cash has been sitting in the local government investment pool. I'd say probably in the last 2 to 3 months is really where other opportunities have finally started to be more financially advantageous to the city. Unfortunately, that has also come during budget season, in which case, again, over the last couple of months, that has not risen to the highest levels on my priority list of trying to get things done. So that is definitely something that staff is already very interested in looking into and finding the best way to maximize the use of our cash to get the highest return, again, within the restrictions that the state provides us.
And to kind of further go down that, this is my second day officially with the City of Grants Pass, so it's going to take me a little longer than it may take Adam to do it.
Oh. Go ahead, Gordon.
Just curious, probably to Adam, are I-bonds even an instrument that the city can use? Because as you know, they're paying more north of 7% right now.
Okay.
I have certainly not seen any opportunities, even half that much so far with what's available to us. For those on the budget committee and council that have been around for a while, you may recall that Jay Meredith, my predecessor, that was his area of expertise and his cup of tea. So he might have been able to provide a better answer on that, but I would have to look that up. But no, I haven't seen any potential interest rates anywhere near that amount.
Well, there are U.S. government bonds, I-bonds issued by the Treasury.
Gordon, bring something in for our discussion when we do discuss this. Go ahead.
I'll tell you what, probably the easiest thing for me to do is send a YouTube thing to Adam or somebody in the city staff, which explains it quite thoroughly, okay?
So I can kind of maybe indirectly answer the question. Okay. So coming from another Oregon city that had a portfolio and a portfolio manager, a consultant, no, that was, and we were purchasing on a regular basis, that didn't make the cut, I guess, of being one of the items that we went through.
Go ahead.
Kind of a quick note. Are you're referring to inflation adjusted or inflation index bonds? There is a laundry list of restrictions, including a relatively small cap on amount that an individual is restricted to. I've never heard of an institution being able to invest in I-bonds. So I'm not an expert on I-bonds. That's outside my area of expertise, but I do know there are a number of potential roadblocks. I mean, the headline number on I-bonds looks great, but when you dig into how much you can actually put into them and who qualifies, I think there's a lot of roadblocks in place.
Okay. Now that it's been precise and concise and all that, I think we should vote on it. So I'm not going to ask for more discussion because I might get it. Okay. Those that are in favor, would you signify by raising your right hand or your left, whatever you want? Okay.
Tripp is in favor.
Up. Okay, thank you. That's right. Okay, and those that are not in favor? Oh, okay. Abstain, please. And we hope you can continue to sustain. Okay. So I think we've done what we need to do for the day. Come on, Brian. Yes.
Well, it's not that topic. I just had a question, or maybe it's a request, but it's of such minor nature that maybe staff can just handle it. With regards to the slide decks that we get for the presentations, is there any way those could be sent out at least the day before, so there's a little bit of time just to look at them before we're in the room?
Oh, yeah, definitely. We'll be able to do that. That was what I was planning on doing, definitely.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll continue the hearing to next Tuesday at 6. Thank you all for being here and participating.